So as people are joining in, I'll take the opportunity to first things first welcome everyone to the session. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Soha Youssef, and I'm convening this seminar series on behalf of unu-merit and Maastricht University in the Netherlands. The Migration Seminar Series invites researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and others to discuss their work related to migration. Before I will introduce today's speaker, there are some housekeeping that I'll need to do. Our speaker's talk today will last for approximately 40 minutes, after which we'll have 20 minutes for discussion and questions from the audience. I would like to ask you to keep your questions until after our speaker is done with the presentation, unless, of course, it's a clarification question. You can then either ask the question in the chat or read it out loud when we allocate turns with the raise the hand function on Zoom. Please, in the meantime, keep your microphones unmuted. Your camera can, of course, be turned on if you'd like to, but please be aware that we are recording the seminar for distribution on our YouTube channel later. On our YouTube channel, you will also find recordings of previous migration seminar series. And now let me introduce today's speaker. So we are very happy to welcome Professor Mihari Tadele Maru, who's a professor at the Migration Policy Center at the European University Institute. Previously, he served as legal expert at the Office of the Legal Counsel of the African Union Commission. He also served as chief strategist, lead migration expert, and legal drafter for the IGAD and AU High Level Advisory Group. Professor Mihari Tadele is a graduate of Harvard and Oxford Universities. He holds a PhD in legal sciences from J.L. Gießen University in Germany, and an MPA from Harvard. That's a brief about all the most of the expertise, I hope, of Professor Mihari. Nevertheless, if you'd like to know more about him, you can always check his link on our website. And with that being said, I will pass the floor to Professor Tadele. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon, or good day to all of you, wherever you are. Soha, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and Melissa, Valeska, and other colleagues for inviting me to do a presentation and exchange ideas on this topic today. I will try, like you said, 40 minutes may be too long. If there is a possibility of shortening my presentation, I will try to trim it to less than 40 minutes. And we'll see during discussion, maybe there will be a better exchange of ideas. Now, I want to start with some presentation, and this has to do first 2 points that the Africa-Europe partnership, Africa-EU, African Union, European Union partnership is going to celebrate the 25th anniversary this year. And the joint ministerial meeting of African Union and European Union a week ago or so has noted that. And as a follow-up of that, as usual, there will be a summit of the 7th African Union, European Union summit later this year. One of the agendas, the priority agenda that has been identified for the past 25 years is migration and mobility. So in the latest ministerial meeting, which took a bit longer than expected because the 6th summit was in 2022, over 2 years now, has taken a little bit of time to organize, but now it's coming, and migration and mobility remains in the agenda. Of course, I would like to also emphasize that the Africa AU-EU partnership is one of the most well-organized, structured, and well-financed partnership that the African continent has, the African Union has. There is a continent-to-continent partnership, commission-to-commission consultations, ministerial joint meetings, heads of state at summit level. So it's structured, well planned, and usually regularly held. So one would expect that there will be higher delivery on the promises made. There are a lot of declarations that come during these meetings. They have become more performative, ritualistic, as you will see even on migration and mobility, probably worse than other sectors. Like in peace and security, there might be much higher or better outcome than the other sectors. Let me share some slides to show what I meant in this partnership in general, and then later on specifically on the migration and mobility. Okay, this is not the one. I think I want to share is another one. Yeah. So can you see my slides, Soha?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just to show you what this partnership means to Africa and to Europe, again, there are trends, but there are also factors. And in my presentation, you will see I will speak more in numbers and figures in my presentation so that we have evidence behind some of the conclusions that I will be presenting. My presentation will be very simplified presentation of this partnership on migration and mobility, and what are the successes, what are the less successful ones, where there are serious challenges. But to show you that, to give a context in numbers, that the Europe and European Union remains the biggest trading partner of Africa. Remember, Africa more than ever wants trade partnership rather than aid. And if you want to measure it in terms of long-standing and largest trade exchange, Europe remains the biggest. And you can see on the slide on the second part. Now, that trend is changing. You can see in the second one that the trend is very important. Past figures are important, past partnership, and the size is very important, but is more important even in terms of trend. Now, the United States, you can see the trade partnership has been declining significantly from 4.8 to 4%. We'll see how the Trump administration will change these factors, these numbers. India, around there, but is still relatively smaller, from 6.6 2019 to 2021 to 6%. China is increasing. One trend that you can see from 19.2% to 27% to 22%, and then EU declining. That's very important. That while Africa wants more trading with Europe, the trend is that the percentage that we see is a declining one. Of course, others are increasing. I could have showed you other slides, numbers, figures, that others have increased from 42.4 to 45. Others includes many countries, but Gulf countries are the majority of them, especially UAE, about 4% of investment and increasing trading partner with the vision that they have set for the growth of the country UAE, the state, and also the other GCC countries that has been on the increase. So it's very important to take this into context. And like I said, the partnership has been there for 25 years now in formal structure. Now, coming back to migration and mobility, I want to address two aspects, and this is based on research that was conducted with my colleague Martin Roos from Migration Policy Center on assessing this 25 or 20 years of partnership between Africa and Europe on migration. And which aspect of this partnership on migration works and what are the reasons behind it? That's the first question I want to address. And the second is what aspect of the cooperation has been less effective or that are not really working and why? These are the two major questions that I want to address during this presentation. Now, remember the partnership has four components, at least in the Valletta agreement. These four partnership has been identified. First is enhancing promotion developmental benefits of migration. On the one hand, so that's the positive aspect of migration, which most often associated to mobility, mobility for better opportunity, and addressing the root cause of irregular migration and forced displacement, especially for displacement internally or external displacement as refugees, and irregular migration where there is no real authorization to travel or entry to countries. And this is happening in a mixed migration context. So that's the first aim. The second is legal promotion of legal migration and mobility, to be more specific, and that is legal pathways, providing expanding legal pathways. The third is cooperation on protection and asylum processes, which is based in 1951, mainly 1951 convention, the UN Convention on Refugees. And then the fourth one, prevention and combating irregular migration, smuggling and trafficking, especially the two, smuggling and trafficking, which are considered under international law violation of human rights and even fundamental rights in the case of trafficking, because it involves a form of slavery. So these are the four components, but there is additional component that has been pushed by Europe on return, readmission, and reintegration. As you know, this is very contentious, very sensitive for various reasons involving politics of identity in the countries of destination in European countries. Readmission becomes and reintegration becomes a problem for return, very important for European side, readmission and reintegration, serious challenge for countries of origin, in this case, for our case, the African continent. And their reintegration is mostly forgotten, while the first two R's are emphasized in this partnership. I will come back to this point later. Now, to simplify the presentation, like I said, there are four factors we considered in this research, our finding, that are critical for success of any partnership on migration and mobility. The first one is that partnership areas in this migration and mobility that are shared as a priority of the both sides have a better success, better chance of success. That where there is these priorities are shared, and I will give examples later, that they fared better than others. Those that are identified as commonly shared, commonly overlapping priorities have better. And the second one, as a result of that, political support, those partnership areas in the migration and mobility that enjoy political support from both sides have a better chance of success. And understandably, political support means determination of leadership, time, energy, finance, that has implications for the system. And that's the reason why those involving identity politics, resource politics, power politics in election will have less political support in terms of commonly achieving commonly shared or identified objectives. And the third one is those that have been endowed with resource, or those that there is higher allocation of resource for, have also relatively done better, and they worked better than others. And there will be examples how money in many cases in this partnership has been used as troubleshooter, as a means to silence opposition, to acquiescence on agreements and declarations, and then later on, even if resources are located in some consideration, for example, on return rate, it doesn't work, even if the case. So without number one and two, it becomes really difficult, even if you have considerable resources. Usually there are many substitution effect that happen because money is used as troubleshooter. And the last one, an important element factor is implementation capability. Mechanisms that exist there dedicated to do this have also implications on how far the components of migration and mobility succeed in the implementation by both sides. Now, the first, I think, you can see that the partnership has shown a very comprehensive, detailed declaration documents, joint plans that come out, but the actions are very, very limited. And this is one of the characters that you see in this partnership is there is a lot of promise, but of less delivery, in practical terms. And so for some of them, there are no mechanisms developed for the two sides to negotiate and implement package in detail. And this goes to the lack of really genuine, frank dialogue between the two parties, and especially when one of the parties do not agree to some of the proposals at multilateral level between the two continents, they go bilateral. And this bilateral arrangement has been shown even in Valletta, where specific countries were invited from European side without really full consultation. And the result is that there was no full-fledged buy-in by the continent, and some countries are more favored by those arrangements than others. Now, some of the cooperations, like I said earlier, is that some that have worked better are those that have been put as a shared priority, and there is a political support. Some of the examples are uncontroversial, politically uncontroversial topics, diaspora policy, still political economy. There is a lot of informal, formal interest groups, actors that are involved in diaspora policy, diaspora issues, but African countries and European countries on diaspora issue, on removing high amount of remittance fees, reduction of any barriers that will inhibit diaspora community to contribute in their origin countries or to organize themselves in countries of destination has never been a big problem. Actually, some of the institutional setups like AIR, the African Institute for Remittances, and policies on diaspora by many countries, including specific departments being established in origin countries, has been supported. And diaspora communities in Europe has been also strongly supported by this arrangement. So you will see also on free movement of persons, even if the priority has been priority agenda for the Pan-African agenda in Africa, and this has been therefore since the establishment of OAU formally, but it's the African side that wants to promote this strongly, and the European side, for various reasons, which I will not go to detail, that they support free movement arrangements that are coming, and many of the RECs have developed a protocol, regional protocol, and at African Union level also continental free movement arrangement that is now presented as a treaty. So on these areas, there is shared priority. They are shared priority. They are also political support. They enjoy political support. Now, some considerable resource has been allocated for diaspora activities, for free movement of persons, especially development of normative frameworks. And a little bit, even if limited, but on remittance and establishment of remittance institute, I think that has been something that you can see as a bit better success. Now, where there are less or no tangible progress has been seen is, for example, expanding legal pathways, movements of Africans to Europe, especially from low to medium skilled workers to migrate to Europe, which is the demand has been the constant demand of African governments and Africans to have more access. I will talk about this one even by showing the high number of visa rejection, Schengen visa rejection that you see. Not necessarily for work, these are not necessarily for work, but generally speaking, they may show the trend in terms of policy positions. And this extends, even if there are pilot programs, Arise, Horizon, Palim, and other kind of projects that are currently ongoing bilaterally by Belgium, Morocco, and other countries, that has been also doing similar seasonal mobility of Africans. These are very small scale to really tip the overall investment made by the European side and the demand from the African side. So one place where there is no significant progress, and it looks like for many as a source of frustration, is actually legal pathways, where Europe is more closing the door for mobility compared to other parts where they are not in absolute numbers big, but in other regions there is high more mobility, more openness for visa. For example, in the Middle East, Asia is an example that are emerging as a destination for many African labor market. That has been always there in the Middle East, but other parts like Turkey and in Asia, China, and other places. So here, although both sides of the partnership had repeatedly committed to protecting human rights, the violation of human rights of migrants is incredible. You see it in ubiquitous in everywhere in media outlets that the protection level has been actually dwindling as part of deterrence, perhaps as part of combating irregular migration, rescue on the sea, many aspects, border control. You can see even the allocation of resource among the 5 areas that we have talked about. You will see more into control containment of migrants from reaching in Europe is the main focus. And as a result, you have non-state actors involved in violations of fundamental human rights, where some places are acting like a black hole for international human rights protection. Non-state actors running detention centers, killing people, and rescue humanitarian organizations banned by law to intervene when migrants are with the potential of drowning on the sea. So human rights, again, protection of migrants. Migrants are humans and they have fundamental human rights, even if they don't have a right to entry and free movement, but their fundamental rights, basic fundamental rights as human beings has to be respected. This is not there and actually getting worse. You will see some figures on those who have died on the sea and news of prisons and reports by victims of trafficking and those who solicit smuggling and ending up in the hands of different non-state actors. Now, to show on the Schengen visa, even if, like I say, Schengen visa is short term, but it shows the trend in general. For Africa compared to Asia and globally, it has been on decline. In 2013, the rejection rate for visa was for Africa, as you can see, was 18 percent of rejection rate now 27. Some countries like Comoros, it's 61%. Algeria, Morocco, it could go above 45, 40%. And this doesn't show increasing access to Europe, but a decline. And compared to Asia, again, even if there is increase in rejection rate generally globally, but Africans have higher rate of rejection, about 30% higher, 17% higher than any other applicant from any other region. And this shows that perhaps one has to be compiled in terms of comparison, how many have work permits has been given and how many resident permits has been given, but it is indication the visa rejection rate, it includes many of these trends that I talked about. Now, this could also be seen in terms of increase on whether the policy, this partnership has worked. You can see on the one hand, irregular entries to Europe from globally is not big, even if it has been increasing, decreasing from 2015 up to now, but since 2021, it has been peaking, but most entry are legal entries. It's within this context that in the case of Africa, there is higher rejection rate of Schengen visa applications. And in recent time, irregular arrivals through the Mediterranean migration route has been peaking. You can see there which country, also Italy, Greece, and Spain. There are Syrians, Afghans, and Bangladesh and other places, migrants coming from those, but majority of them are from Africa. And the Valletta agreement may have diffused some of the tension, and generally speaking, you may see a decline in the short term, but the long term, it's catching up. It's almost, I don't have for 2023, 24, I'm sure there is already an increasing trend in that regard. And if we go to the human rights aspect that I have talked about, the protection, Africans are the biggest victims of these dangerous routes. And recorded dead and missing migrants, if you see in Mediterranean, is about 30,000 for 2024, I think, 2024, as September, since 2014 to 2024, September 25. And there are, of course, some other countries that have highest number, like Afghanistan, Syria, 2022, for 2022. Probably now it might be less. But if you see the other countries, it's Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Senegal, Eritrea, and then Afghanistan, you have some countries. If you see the total 20 countries, more than half are African countries. And there is large number of days in that route, Mediterranean route, and there must be reason for this, days and missing. Now, on the issue of return and readmission, which the European side puts a lot of pressure, actually puts all its eggs on this partnership area, that it makes it break or make element of the deal is to the extent that visa restrictions, Schengen visa sanctions are applied when there are low return from these countries. So little progress has been made on this, on the return. Even the resistance from African side for readmission and reintegration, resource that is required for reintegration is critical. Of course, there are bilateral and trilateral agreements that have come as a means to evacuate, basically return and arrange readmission from Libya mainly, but from other parts of Africa. And this partnership agreements to a large extent are better managed because the human rights protection is given a little bit of due consideration, and the involvement of the African Union in this negotiation makes it also better, at least in terms of legitimacy, to enter into agreement and facilitate the return. And you could see partial success. And this figure was up to 2022, I think, 2021, actually, 15,000 migrants who has been returned from Libya and North African countries to the other parts of Africa. And return and readmission ultimately is not, it's a political economy question, ultimately. It is returning citizens that have invested. Many people will tell you this is an investment from family, collectively from village in some cases, that individuals are sent to Europe. And it is a loss of big investment when they are forcibly returned or returned to Africa, to their origin country. And it has a political, economic connotation. Countries who agree on return arrangements face a backlash, political backlash. And it is also a source of hard currency, foreign currency for the countries. So it is really a lot of interests, a lot of actors coming together in terms of political, economic implications. So constituencies in the diaspora are very powerful politically. They can influence significant political process back home. So it affects political constituencies of the government is in charge of the state, the origin state. So they don't want to touch this as much. And it's also sovereignty issue. For the countries, they don't want to admit individuals who do not claim themselves as the nationals of the country. So it has serious implication for the countries. I can show you the case studies that we did for return. You can see that most of the return, there was a spike in 2016, but for Africa still it's less than 30%, 36% actually. There was in 2018 increase a little bit for Morocco, but the average is less than 35, 36% return rate. Actually now it's less than 10% usually. In 2022, you can see the average is less than 20, and for Africa actually less than 15%. And this is for Morocco, Tunisia, Nigeria, and Niger, countries that we selected for this research. So return rate is very low, while the European side demands on this highly on the return, and the African countries would drag their feet procedurally and other means, and a lot of resource, a lot of political sanction, diplomatic sanction is put on the countries that are not cooperating for higher research. The recent sanction was Ethiopia, for example, last year, where the year before, actually, maybe 2024 or 2023, anyway, sanction on visa was imposed for non-cooperation by Ethiopian government. Now, in my opinion, ultimately, partnerships has to be measured by delivery, but delivery is dependent on the allocation of resource, like we said. If you want to know the priority of the state, a government, you don't look at declaration and promises. You look at the budget. That's where the real commitment and determination lies. So the money, in the research, we have identified about 204 projects in 26 countries with more than 63 agreements of memorandum understanding type, and allocation of more than 5 billion, some parts from other funds. They are not migration fund by themselves, like internal security fund, return fund, external borders, but some, they are not purely migration and mobility, but almost all policy instruments, financial instruments of Europe were made subservient for migration. And the biggest impact that you see in Africa was, since the Valletta Agreement was, everything was subservient, serving migration agenda. And that's very dangerous for partnership, like we said. The partnership cannot be sustained only on one aspect. And most of the contact groups that have been established, we have many processes: Rome process, Rabat process, Khartoum process. Horn of Africa Initiative process, many other processes. And these routes, remember, for Africa are not the biggest in terms of number. Even in terms of human rights violation, Middle Eastern routes through Yemen and deportation of hundreds of thousands in 1 year from one country happened to a specific country. For Ethiopia, for example, from Saudi Arabia, at one point 177,000 migrants were deported. So in terms of headache, this is not really at the top priority of the countries, African countries. But the investment is huge through these instruments, and it supplies this agenda. Sometimes for the African countries, migration could feel like it's not the top 5, 6, 7, 10 agenda, but because of the pressure, the migration diplomacy that engages money, it becomes number one and top priority. And you can see how much this money was allocated. And large amount of it, 32%, was improved on migration management. And migration management is containment. It's a border control most of the time. It is about artificial way of containing migrants. It's about actually hardening border areas, even those that have been informally allowing people to move, touching areas that has never been really under the purview of the states through this, supporting, giving many capabilities, surveillance capabilities, border control capabilities to the countries. And then you have improved governance and conflict prevention. To an extent, it works. Second one is strengthening resilience of communities. Most often, this is again on local integration. Remember, for refugee, in terms of refugee hosting, Africa has the biggest, one of the biggest refugee population, and they are hosted in neighboring countries usually. And the preference among the three durable solutions for refugees is local integration is the one which is prioritized. It's part of containment, just containing the migrants from secondary migration towards Europe or elsewhere, and containing them through strengthening resilience with community investment in the place of the refugee camps, where refugees are also out of camp in some arrangements. They are out of camp, and there's this money goes to the support. And you can see the least one here is expanding opportunity, about 17%. So the real and declared priorities have disparities in this regard. And some of the money also goes to implementing partners that are not necessarily African. Some of them are not necessarily an African. They are development agencies, so the money goes to these development agencies, which are part of European government, or not government system, but the European system or the UN system. And in terms of asymmetrical power relations, it becomes very, very problematic to ensure that the priorities of African side is maintained. And this goes through money. And the international organization is the UN, and development agencies are most often agencies like GIZ or others, different European countries. And direct management and budget support for the countries and local entities about 35%. And you can see how much money dictates the prioritization of what is implemented. And now I will stop here. Then I have few slides later on. If there is any question relevant to some of the points that I want to raise, then we can come back to this. Soha, I want to stop here, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, first things first, thank you very much for this very, very, very interesting presentation. I'm not gonna talk for much. Let's just get started with the questions, comment. So, as mentioned, you can use the raise hand function, or just drop your question or comment in the chat box. Let's go, Melissa.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mahari. I'll try to kick off here with a question. Of course, you've given a lot of really interesting information, and one of the things that you talked about was on freedom of movement and how Europe, at least officially, very much promotes freedom of movement within Africa. But I'm interested in the difference between policy and practice here. So we know that a lot of the money, that a lot of the EUTF funding has also gone towards strengthening borders and border control within Africa also, right? And this is also in areas where there are already freedom of movement agreements. And I'm just wondering, in your own experiences, in how far this focus of the EU on strengthening borders in Africa has maybe had an effect on that freedom of movement within the different regions. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm going to leave it up to you if you'd like to take several questions, or would you like to answer them one by one? It's completely up to you. Sorry, you're on mute.
Yes, sorry, so thank you, Melissa. But maybe we take the two hands that are up, and then I can come for comments or feedback.
Lita, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Mahari. Thank you so much for such a fantastically useful presentation. I missed the first couple of minutes, but I hope that there's a report or series of publications coming that I would love to read. I was also interested in Melissa's question on this tension. But I had a second question on, you highlighted the increasing role as well, if I understand correctly, the value of EU trade is declining at the same time that China is increasing its trade and development aid, and you said actually is increasingly open to legal migration from Africa in a way that the EU is not. And I wondered whether you could talk more about the impacts of those combined disparities between the EU's relationship with the AU and China and other centers of influence in the world. Thank you so much.
Let's take Tobias. Go ahead.
Hi. Also, thank you from my side. Really enjoyed listening. And let me preface what I'm saying, that connection, even though in the office actually was sometimes bad and I had to reconnect at some point, I just hope I didn't miss anything when I'm asking now my question. So from what I understand is that you say when there's a lack of shared priorities, this makes it very hard to actually see some progress on the different areas, right? From what I understood, for the governments on the African side, this expansion of legal opportunities actually matters a lot, but less so for the Europeans. And conversely, the progress on readmissions and returns matters a lot to Europeans, but not so much for the African governments. So I was just wondering whether, looking at that, wouldn't you think that there should be a lot of room for a kind of tit for tat deal? And how much, how much process or how much negotiation is centered around exactly this question? I'm also asking because I'm myself working on regularization reform, and I can see from the German public, at least, there's actually a lot of openness for increasing legal pathways if at the same time, in my research, countries outside the European Union would volunteer to act as like safe third countries, so take in irregular migrants from Germany. For that reason, I feel like there should actually be a somewhat almost obvious compromise. I'm wondering, why is it so hard to make progress on that front?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tobias. I think this, and Talita, if I correctly pronounce your name, yeah. Let me start with Melissa's question, and this is something that we have been grappling with to an extent. First, people would look, why is the European side supporting free movement arrangements? And there was some of the projects that I was involved, as you know, are not new. The free movement agenda is a Pan-African agenda. It's one of the integrative instruments or opportunities in Africa. It has been there established as Pan-African agenda pillar of that. And it has been there for a long time. But for the lack of resource, there was no even convention treaty that were developed by the African Union, by the REX, except ECOWAS mainly and East African Community. But others were not really investing even a small amount of money for free movement arrangements. Now, with European side support, financial support, this mushroomed a lot of efforts, events, discussions. And to the extent the African Union has to develop the draft treaty and negotiate it and adopt it, and it's adopted now, even if the ratification is very small, there are a large number, relatively signatories. And as far as I remember, it's only 4 countries that have ratified. Maybe it has increased now. Second, and very important in this regard, is the money that came to support this was fast tracked the development of free movement protocols. Those that have been involved at AU level, at REX level, show that there is an interesting development. Actually, there were very good. There were some very good developments in terms of accommodating some movements that wouldn't have been accommodated if these protocols were developed 30 years ago when the Abuja Treaty was ratified. For example, facilitating free movement for people who are affected by climate disaster was included now as a result of these discussions. So new dimensions where people who are affected by disaster, and in the Horn of Africa, Sahel region, even Southern Africa, there are disasters, flood in Southern Africa, drought and famine in Horn of Africa, and these are mostly lack of government intervention, that it's a governance problem mainly, but also a natural disaster that come, other natural disaster too. So in the protocols, there was an innovative way of including provisions that show communities that are affected by climate change, by this kind of natural disaster, should be able to cross borders without even showing identification card. So an inclusion of new mechanism was included, a positive aspect of that. Now, the other aspect, negative aspect, is that while you are promoting free movement in this way, and free movement means ultimately, not necessarily, the country will not have everything under the purview. Entry and exit is a very sovereign act of a state. They have to know what is going on. That doesn't mean they have to impede or prohibit that, but facilitate those that have the necessary documentation. It could be traditional identification of individuals in the border area. So now, with the idea of softening borders, the idea of facilitating and making these colonial borders, turning them into these artificial imposed colonial borders into integrative sort of borders, at least for the communities that are nearby, has been there. It has been de jure implemented, de facto implemented. Most often it was a de facto reality that communities would pass to get service on the Ethiopian side of Moyale for education, and on the Kenyan side of Moyale for health services, because one is better than other. I mean, education in Kenya and health in the Ethiopian side, or something like that. In other places, similar. Kumruk between Sudan and South Sudan, borders were soft during markets. There are different kind of market time, so people will cross. Even there was arrangements, 28 kilometer, 50 kilometer, people can move without any documentation between this border. Now, the free movement arrangements in the conception of Africa, a Pan-African integrative agenda, the idea was actually to de jurize this one, to give it a legal standing that people can move faster. And the role, the function, The business of the state is to facilitate this mobility as far as it's good, in the sense that it's not about smuggling, it's not about trafficking, it's not about contraband and so on. As far as people are doing it for legal purpose, they should be facilitated. Now, with EUTF, with the Valletta, came a big parachuted money that completely hardens this border. Places that the government were not able to see, to put under their purview, they were provided helicopters, drones, this and that, patrol cars. This capability they didn't have before, they were given. This is state apparatus. And with this capability, of course, remember, under colonial system, these areas are peripheral areas. If not for resource, they are not really remembered. They are not part of the planning. And there was no infrastructure. Now you have more infrastructure for this, and governments were hardening this. So previously, people would move for markets on the other side, wouldn't need to show anything. They would be required to show ID or even to fill forms. Even the amount of money that they can transact was being limited. They have to show papers. These are processes for informal cross-border traders. These are hefty processes, bureaucratic processes that add to this. And the concept of border control, for example, through integrated border management, which is to an extent not necessarily compatible with African border governance strategy, which allows more to softening these borders, it doesn't go. So it has contradictory element. But the assumption why Europe was supporting this free movement is that maybe the pressure for irregular migration outside Africa will be lessened. I don't think this is supported by any research. And secondly, there were impacts that could be identified if you have more mobility within Africa. The pressure on those young people who, high number of people who want to move within the region, could be facilitated within the region, their movement. Remember, most of the survey shows that young African generations want to move within their region rather than outside Africa. And it's not within even Africa, it's within their region. So the idea of facilitating forced regional free movement arrangement has some traction there, even if it has to be studied and it has to be supported by evidence. Of course, for Africa side, like I said, it's a priority, and this was a win-win in that regard. But I think what Europe was giving by one hand was denying to an extent by the other hand in this regard. And a detailed research is required. On the second point by Talitha, I think there are new partners emerging. I mean, the structural shift is clear. Global structural shift is clear. Economic power is not necessarily now in Europe or in America only. There are economic dispersal of economic powers. Like I said, GCC countries now play a big role in investment and trade. Asian countries are destinations for medical and other kind of education. I can talk a little bit about student mobility, for example, emerging new destinations for educational systems in the GCC, in Asia, in Turkey, and other places that you have increasing number. Even if the absolute number still is European is the first destination, sought after destination, US, North America is, but the percentage has been declining in favor of other places too. Now, most of the movements to China are business related, and it goes to the trade prioritization. It's not necessarily for residents as such, but for education and trade. And this makes it much easier for various reasons. First of all, the African countries are supporting that, and this China and other countries want this partnership to increase, trade to increase. Turkey is an example, another example where you have huge capability of Turkish capability of production that was meant for European accession. Once it's accessed, now used for the production used for African market, a huge number. And the educational system being open for some countries especially, but for all, medical tourism. The same thing could be said about Dubai, UAE, Saudi, and for China, The number, I don't have it. But I think there are few research that show increasing number of people also opening research, trade and business in China. And this is increasing, especially from Nigeria, but also from South Africa and from Tanzania and Kenya. And Egypt too. Increasing business. Some of them, the business are split into two places, for example, medical supplies, medical equipment, and we know there is other production, other capacity in China, and labor is relatively not cheap, but affordable in Africa compared to China. So there is economic reasons for that. And joint ventures, there are few researchers that talk about joint ventures where elites from Africa are closely working and they see it as a positive trend that should be reinforced. I can share some of the research on that if you want. On this tit for tat, Tobias, I think I completely agree with you. Something that has to be applied innovatively. Of course, that has been discussed. It was not concretized in terms of figures. It was always left hanging. And when agreements are left hanging and you have huge asymmetry of power, financial or other kind of diplomatic power, the ones that will be implemented, including, like I said, who are the implementing agencies? It's not the African necessarily. It's the European coming and implementing it there. Then there is always this tilt, inclination, propensity to impose the will of the others and not implement. It has been always there, legal pathways, but it has never been concretized in figures, in numbers. And the African side has never presented also as such that this is the proposal we have. You have to accept this number of people, and we will accept also this number of returnees, and we will reintegration. Most often and this goes to one of the factors that I talked, the capability, the fourth factor, the capability to implement. So the African side lacks that capability. I always jokingly say that when I was at the AU heading the migration coordination, this is a long time ago now, has changed. I was the only person representing the African side, and the European Commission side will come with battalions of experts to me, and I have to prioritize naturally. The same thing applies to many areas. So I think it is the capability aspect, but also genuine effort from European side to really commit and implement the pledges that the Europeans make. Now, of course, I think the tit for tat could work, in my opinion. It needs some logical dialogue, frank dialogue, not a knee-jerk reaction and campaign like the Valletta system. The Valletta system, everyone wants to show that it's acting on something. And it was more internal to Europe than to Africa. It was not about the number increasing as such. It was more the identity politics that were surging in the European system that pushed. But I think it disrupted a little bit on some of the things that were moving with more understanding. So I would say there should be a proper schedule of arrangement where the private sector, in some cases, in Nigeria, for example, Swiss Nigeria, arrangement where people were hired even once they return. They were hired by companies from Swiss companies in Nigeria that worked in these places. And there is a possibility of bilaterally improving this kind of arrangement. Now, for me, the dilemma is that those that are to be returned, that are illegally overstaying in Europe, vis-a-vis those who will get legal pathway or visa to move to Europe, there might be discrepancy. I don't know about that. There is a need for research on that. Does it mean that because you expand legal pathways, there will be less, for example, irregular migration? That's difficult. Really, it's very difficult to say that. But at the same time, if you expand the legal pathways, the countries could, as tit for tat, an arrangement, political arrangement, could allow the return. But the citizens, the communities, the families which will be affected by both may be different. Legal pathways, if it is focused on highly skilled professionals, it will not necessarily mean those that will be returning will be having a chance to return back or to apply legally. And it will, again, discriminate, if you wish, the low-skilled people to remain in the countries and high-skilled people to move. That is where the focus should be. But this could be part of the negotiation, that actually there could be a mixed schedule where an arrangement, countries could identify their demand and they could supply specific aspect of these skills that are necessary. But this is something to be done. And I think the dialogue since the Valletta Agreement was not easy. And then COVID came, the disruption, even to tone down the rhetoric that was there and the sensitivity that gripped Europe in terms of migration with the politics and power politics, identity politics. Handling those become sensitive, and the European side was not in a position to negotiate at European level. It was more on bilateral, and they were the ones who have the competence, and it was becoming too difficult to deal at continent to continent level. Now, at country level, the negotiations could be again tilted towards in favor of Europe, and that pays back through the country dragging their feet in implementation. They agree in pledges, and then they drag their feet in the implementation, and that becomes a problem that, as you can see in some of the research, the return becomes too low. I don't know whether I have addressed the question, but the question is also my question that we have to engage that question seriously.
Thank you very much. We have two questions on the chat box, but unfortunately we're running out of time. So I'm going to suggest that the two people that wrote on the chat box to reach out to you. I'm going to also copy the questions and send them over. Just so we can conclude on time, because I know some people in this call are in a rush for other things. With that, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you also for this fantastic presentation. And I'm sure everyone is also very excited to have the recording online very soon. So I'll make sure I get that online very soon. Yeah, and we look forward to hopefully hosting you again in the future.
Thank you, Soha, and thank you, Melissa and colleagues. Appreciate it. Goodbye to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, Nahar. Bye.
Ciao, ciao, Valeska. Bye-bye.